Right now, I am in southwest Missouri, and I am standing on a place that in the Civil War was known as Bloody Hill. This is the battlefield of Wilson's Creek, which was fought in August of 1861 and saw the death of the very first Union general in the Civil War, Nathaniel Lyon. Now, in the last episode, we talked a lot about the Battle of Wilson's Creek, but there is more here at this site, specifically some of the artifacts that were recovered from Wilson's Creek. So anyway, in this episode, we're going to be taking a look at some of what they pulled out of the ground right here on this Civil War battlefield. So in the last episode of History Traveler, I mentioned how in the Civil War, not a lot of attention gets paid to the Trans-Mississippi Theater, which is why I wanted to come here to Wilson's Creek and kind of walk the battlefield and see what we can learn. Now, there was something exceptionally grim that I didn't talk about in that episode that happened down here in this valley that we're going to get to later. But first, we're going to pop into the museum and see what all we can learn about this battle and the Trans-Mississippi Theater. All right, we just got into the museum, and they start off talking about Missouri's status as a slave state. So Missouri is a state that was born in conflict, came into the Union as part of the Missouri Compromise. So that's where Missouri entered as a slave state, and in exchange, Maine entered as a free state in order to maintain the balance between slave states and free states in the Union. And here in Missouri, they show the areas where you see slavery highly concentrated. Now, it's not a north-south thing in Missouri. It's not like the North doesn't have slaves and the South does, even though they are a border state. You have a lot of slavery that is concentrated around the Missouri River bottom, a lot of hemp farming. Okay, so those light areas have more than 15% of the population being enslaved. And then you also see down here in Springfield, well, as it was growing and had a lot of farmland, well, the enslaved population here in Greene County also increased. And then over here, they have an example of some shackles that were recovered from a house in Ohio on the Underground Railroad, but they're placed here as an example of just the cruelty of slavery. But of course, Missouri is going to be a slave state that remains loyal to the Union. Now, the crisis in this country over slavery didn't just spring up out of nowhere and then ignite the Civil War. This is something that had been going on for years. And tensions were further inflamed with the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which allowed for something called popular sovereignty in Kansas, meaning that the people of Kansas, even though they were north of the 3630 parallel and weren't supposed to have slavery, they were going to be allowed to choose for themselves whether to be a slave state or a free state when they joined the Union. So the result was something called Bleeding Kansas, where there was just an incredible amount of violence that took place in Kansas and Missouri. So you can think of this as kind of like the Civil War before the Civil War starts. And a lot of that is going to be centered around this man right here, old John Brown. So John Brown is going to be, of course, as you know, a very fierce abolitionist and is willing to use violence in order to see slavery abolished. Was going to try and ignite a war to abolish slavery, and had an attempted raid on the Harper's Ferry Arsenal in Virginia in 1859. Well, what we see here are a selection of weapons that are either directly or indirectly connected with John Brown. So there at the top, There's a model 1841 54 caliber rifle from the Harper's Ferry Armory. So this is the type of weapon that John Brown was hoping to capture and then arm slaves for a revolt. I'm just going to pick out a few other things here. What we're looking at right here, let me see if I can make some adjustments to see that a little better. This is a tent pole souvenir. Okay, so this is from John Brown. Says here that he would meet with his supporters in Tabor, Iowa to plan raids, and left behind a tent pole at one point that was later cut into souvenir sections, and you can see some writing on it there. And then right here, what we're looking at is a model 1853 Sharps carbine. This was one of the 200 Sharps carbine rifles that was secretly moved by wagon to be given to John Brown. It says here at the Kennedy Farm, not far from the Harper's Ferry Armory. Okay, so this is perhaps one of the guns that was used in the Harper's Ferry raid. Here in this section, they are talking about the choice that Missouri had to face on whether to remain loyal to the Union or whether to secede and become part of the Confederate States of America. And they talk here about some of the key players involved. Now, we're just taking kind of a brief walkthrough, so we're not going too in-depth on any of this stuff. So here they talk about Claiborne Jackson, who was the governor of Missouri at the time and was a pro-secessionist, okay, pro-Confederate. Okay, also in that camp is Sterling Price. He was a veteran of the Mexican-American War, had served in Congress, had been a governor of Missouri at one point, and he is basically going to be put in command of the Missouri State Guard, and which is pro-Confederate. All right, so he's going to be a major player here at the Battle of Wilson's Creek, as we saw in the last video. And then over here are other major players that are involved at Wilson's Creek. We got Captain Nathaniel Lyon. Okay, so was a very fierce abolitionist, was anti-slavery and was anti-secession. As a matter of fact, here's a quote here where he says, "It is no longer useful to appeal to reason on secession, but to the sword." All right, so he is not going to be taking any of it. And then under him is Franz Sigel, okay, who is going to be leading the detachment that is going to be attacking from the south during the Battle of Wilson's Creek. And here's a really interesting piece. Here we obviously have a Confederate flag, and it says here below that this flag was captured by a guy named William Brooks, who was with the 1st Iowa Infantry at Wilson's Creek, and that he sent this home to his family. He later became a colonel of the 56th U.S. Colored Infantry and died at a place called Wallace's Ferry in July of 1864. All right, now this is a pretty cool display. As you would expect at any Civil War museum, they have a variety of weapons. And here at the top, what we are looking at is a Model 1842 musket. And what makes this one particularly unique and worth noting is that it was used by a Kansas soldier here at Wilson's Creek. And then below it, you have a Model 1855. There's a Model 1841, nicknamed a Mississippi rifle below that. And then at the bottom, something called a Merrill carbine. And then they also, since we're here at Wilson's Creek, they have some things that were recovered from Wilson's Creek. So here we have some 6-pound canister shot, and then also a canister plate that was recovered from here at the battlefield. In the last episode, we were talking about how the uniforms early on in the Civil War weren't exactly uniform. There wasn't exactly, blue for the Union and gray or butternut gray for the Confederates. It was really kind of a hodgepodge. So, like, especially for the Missouri State Guard, there's a lot of guys just in civilian clothes. What we're looking at here is a type of civilian coat that would have been worn by members of the Missouri State Guard. And, well, honestly, some of them continued wearing that even throughout their service. And the weapons that they used, again, especially Missouri State Guard, is whatever they had. So it might be like a .32 caliber hunting rifle, like what we see at the top. Or it might be, like your grandpa's old flintlock. So very, very hodgepodge outfit at the beginning of the Civil War. Man, take a look at this old Bowie knife. That is a pig sticker and a half. Holy smokes. Now, again, in the last episode, we talked about the death of General Nathaniel Lyon. He is going to be the first general for the Union side who is killed in the Civil War. And what we are looking at here is a presentation sword that was given to General Nathaniel Lyon just 3 months before his death. Union supporters in St. Louis gave him this sword for his actions to secure the St. Louis arsenal. Yeah, that is really cool. Here on this wall, they talk about a few individuals who were at Wilson's Creek who were awarded the Medal of Honor for acts of bravery on the day of the battle. So they include John Schofield of the 1st Missouri Infantry. Schofield is going to really go on to make a name for himself in the Civil War, be kind of a well-known figure. William Wary, Nicholas Bouquet says here that he voluntarily left the line of battle and, exposing himself to imminent danger from heavy fire of the enemy, assisted in capturing a riderless horse at large between the lines and hitching him to a disabled gun to save the gun for capture. Now, that might not sound like much to us today, but Civil War, that was a pretty big deal. Here's another one for Lorenzo Emel, for bravery in action, is what it says here. Another one for Henry Clay Wood. And here in the museum, well, they actually have a Medal of Honor that was awarded to a guy by the name of William Wary, who was in the 3rd U.S. Reserve Corps of the Missouri Infantry. So we'll have to look up his Medal of Honor citation. Moving into this section of the museum, they start showing artifacts and talking about other battles in the western areas and then the Trans-Mississippi Theater. So what we were looking at here is a depiction of kind of like an officer's field tent right here. So you can see the field desk back there and a nice little bunk where he can get some rest. And something that I like that they do in this museum is they have different things that you can actually put your hands on. So for people who are a little bit more tactile and like to touch and feel things, well, they have some things here where you can kind of interface with history in that way. And then they go on and, well, they have different artifacts from other battles out kind of in the Mississippi area, or the Trans-Mississippi. So here, some stuff from the Battle of Shiloh. This is binoculars and sword and scabbard up there at the top from a general by the name of Thomas Sweeney. They also talk about, the Battle of Prairie Grove. Again, we're just kind of doing a little bit of a speed run here. We're not, going too in-depth on any of this. We might actually try and get to Prairie Grove on this trip. Here is the Battle of Franklin. This is looking at a hairlock that belonged to a guy named Patrick Caniff, who fought at Wilson's Creek. All right, says he was a captain in the 5th Missouri Infantry and was killed while attacking the Union defenses at Franklin. Fellow officer kept a lock of hair and his wallet. All right, yeah, so anyway, that's kind of interesting. So we got a Wilson's Creek connection, also with the Battle of Franklin. All right, and then, let's see. Again, we're just going to kind of take a little bit of a speed run here. Something from the Siege of Vicksburg. This is a U.S. Navy enlisted cap. Now, that's interesting. I would not have guessed that as a Navy enlisted man's cap if you would have just put that in my lap. And then, again, we just have different weapons and cartridge boxes and things like that. And again, they take the opportunity to talk about different battles and engagements in the Trans-Mississippi. So here we're looking at some Confederate arms. Here are some carbines right here. Got a little bit of a reflection in the glass that's kind of hard to deal with, but we'll do the best that we can. Okay, so let's see, that one on the left is a Gallagher carbine, the one in the middle is a Smith carbine, and then the one on the right, probably the most popular, is a Spencer carbine. All right, and then when we get over here, again, a lot of focus here on the Trans-Mississippi Theater. They talk about the last attempt made by the Confederates to take Missouri. This would be in 1864 in what was known as Sterling Price's raid, where he's going to take a big loop through Missouri to try and make one last attempt to swing it for the Confederacy. And then they have, again, some different artifacts that are connected with that. Yeah, this is all very interesting. What we are looking at here is a Staffordshire teapot that is believed to have been owned by Kezia Lyon, who was Nathaniel Lyon's mother, which, you know, that's pretty cool. Something connected with Nathaniel Lyon. But let me show you something even cooler. Sweet heavenly days. There are just guns galore in this place. I'm talking guns on top of guns with a side of bayonets and swords. Just way too many to even get into. But here we see a bunch of revolvers. Reflection's kind of playing havoc with me a little bit. And, ooh, man, I like that tiger stripe pattern on that wood there. That looks cool. And then, again, just more firearms here. Swords just coming out your ears. I'm talking just Civil War weaponry galore, including some of this stuff here. All right, now, what I'll focus in on is this. Now, let me see if I can make some adjustments to where we can see it a little better. What we are looking at here, you'll notice there's a little interesting design in the handle of this revolver. This is a model 1851 Colt Navy percussion revolver that was owned by Major General Sterling Price. And you can see his likeness carved into the handle there, which is kind of interesting. And then here is a pocket watch and case that was also owned by Sterling Price. And then here in the back they have this lithograph. Yeah, that's really cool. All right, now this museum is about to close up on me, but before we get out of here and move on to the next spot, let's take one last look at something connected with General Nathaniel Lyon, the first Union general to be killed in battle. Now, Lyon's body was discovered on the field where he fell. The Union didn't take his body with them. They made a pretty hasty exit from Wilson's Creek. So his body was taken over to the Ray House by the Confederates, and they placed his body on this bed right here in the front room. There, a guy by the name of Dr. Samuel Melcher, who was the assistant surgeon for the 5th Missouri Infantry, examined the body, and not only is this the bed that Nathaniel Lyon was placed on, but the bedspread that you see is the bedspread that covered his body. So here in this museum, they have a rather poignant artifact that is connected with the Battle of Wilson's Creek. All right, well, I've moved back out to the battlefield, and I'm in the glade that is one of the rumored positions where General Lyon died. And after the battle, of course, it's August. There's over 500 dead bodies on the field, so you can just imagine how nasty this place was. Like the stench of the decomposing corpses would have just been overwhelming. And it was largely, the Confederates who are remaining here on the battlefield. The Union has retreated. So it's a lot of the Confederates that are having to be put on burial detail. And as you have all of these decomposing corpses and it's really smelling bad, they kind of wanted to just get the job done, and there's something kind of grim that they did right here in this glade. Now, again, the time that we were talking about, it's August, which is the worst time of year in the Midwest. Just insanely humid, insanely hot. Soldiers talked about how the stench became unbearable and the flies were just horrendous. And I think that they wanted to just get the job done. And here in Missouri, they have what's called karst topographies. There are a lot of caves, and there are also a lot of sinkholes. And if you are a Confederate soldier and it's August and it's hot and you got flies that are going in your ears and up your nose, and you want to just get the job done of doing something with the bodies, well, a sinkhole might be kind of an attractive option in the moment. And right here in this sinkhole, the Confederates disposed of about 30 Union dead. And they remained there throughout the Civil War and were later disinterred and then reinterred at a local military cemetery. All right, so we're going to hop in the car and go take a look at the final resting place of these Union soldiers. All right, we have moved into the city of Springfield, and in 1867 there was a 5-acre plot that was set aside here for the establishment of a military cemetery. And by 1868 there were over 1,500 Union dead who had been reinterred here at the cemetery. So these would be men who died in Springfield, Newtonia, Wilson's Creek, and some of the surrounding areas in southwest Missouri. So there are a couple of monuments here and a couple of graves that we are going to take a look at before we go today. Back at the Wilson's Creek battlefield, we talked about some of the Union soldiers who, after the battle, were thrown in that sinkhole. Now, I don't know what their names were. I don't even know if anyone knows what their names were. They might be some of the unknown who are buried here. But anyway, they were reinterred into this cemetery. And then as you're walking along looking at these headstones, well, you're going to, of course, notice that there are a lot of guys from Missouri who are buried here. Oh, including George Moore, Company B of the 8th Regiment of Missouri Cavalry. That's kind of interesting to me personally because my great-great-great-grandpa was in the 8th Missouri Cavalry. Huh. So that's interesting. So he died December 15th of 1862. And then here we have somebody in the 8th Missouri Infantry. Here's the grave of Henry Garrett, who was in the U.S. Infantry. But here is most of what you're going to find at this cemetery, and that are markers that just simply say unknown U.S. soldier. So you got to keep in mind, in the Civil War, this was before the era of dog tags. So the only way that you could identify a soldier who had been in the ground for a period of time is maybe if there was a letter that was maybe in his knapsack that had been buried with him, or if his name was written on something and buried with him. Sometimes you can get an unknown soldier, but you know the regiment just because of, you know, buttons or things like that. But vast majority of what you're going to find in these Civil War graves are unknown soldiers. Now, we've talked a lot about General Nathaniel Lyon, and Lyon is not buried in this cemetery. He was moved to his home state of Connecticut, but here in the cemetery they do have a monument to General Lyon. So here we can see that etched in this stone, it says, "The citizens of Springfield, to the memory of General Nathaniel Lyon, who fell at the Battle of Wilson Creek while commanding the Union Army August 10th of 1861. I'm literally just walking around this cemetery and looking at headstones and kind of exploring for myself, and just walked up on this one, which is quite interesting. This is the grave of an unknown Indian scout. Now, something that's interesting about the Civil War in the Trans-Mississippi Theater is you are going to have Native American regiments who are going to be fighting on both sides. So the Civil War not only divided the United States, it also divided the Indian tribes. Some of them went and fought with the Confederacy, and some of them went and fought with the Union. Yeah, and right here is the grave of one of those Indian scouts. Here's another monument in the cemetery. This is a 24-foot tall monument that was dedicated on Memorial Day of 1873. So this is an old one. You have this figure of a Union soldier at the top, and this honors troops who were killed in the Battle of Springfield. Now, the man who left the funds to erect this monument was a guy by the name of Thomas Jefferson Bailey. He had been a slave owner at one point and was a very staunch Unionist, and when he died, he left funds to build this monument. So here it says, "In honor to and in memory of the citizens and volunteer soldiers who were killed and died of wounds received in defense of Springfield, Missouri against the rebels, January the 8th, 1863. So that would have been when Marmaduke was threatening Springfield. Here's another cavalry guy. So here, this is the grave of William Jenkins. Looks like he was Company A of the 6th Missouri, and that says SM Cav. That probably stands for State Militia Cavalry. And here's another guy from the same regiment. All right, I'm coming up on all kinds of interesting stuff in here. Now, I might be showcasing my ignorance here, but I've never heard the term artificer before. But that's what Andrew McMiller from Indiana was. Huh. So yeah, if you know what an artificer was, drop a comment and let me know. I've moved just over to a different section of the military cemetery, and here in the center, well, you see that there is a monument to General Sterling Price. We are now in the Confederate section of the cemetery. In 1911, the Confederate Cemetery Association donated 6 acres to the National Cemetery so that Confederates could also be laid to rest here next to the men of the Union. All right, well, there you go. That was a little bit from the Springfield National Cemetery, where those Union soldiers who were thrown into that sinkhole after the Battle of Wilson's Creek ended up after the war, along with so many other Union soldiers and Confederate soldiers who fought in the Trans-Mississippi Theater out here in the area of Missouri. We got a few other places that we're going to be exploring that are connected with the Trans-Mississippi Theater in the Civil War, and yeah, those will be coming up in the next few videos.